Welcome back to this week's episode of Be Bolder. Today wraps up season 3, where we have talked extensively, or for those of you who might think so, ad nauseum, about things like consistency, accountability, dedication, awareness, and mindset related to all of those. So as always, thanks for tuning in all season. We couldn't do this without you. But this week, we round out everything that we've been talking about with an episode that's a little bit about responsibility. And so a lot of folks, and we all do it, and it's not just not taking accountability, but we all say maybe, hey, so-and-so didn't do their thing. So-and-so didn't do this. So-and-so didn't do that. So-and-so didn't do whatever for me. And that is understandable. But at the end of the day, responsibility for ourselves and the things that we are responsible for falls on us. So let's talk a little bit about that this week. Responsibility is a really funny thing because as adults, we're all told, be responsible for this, be responsible for that. You know, you're responsible for yourself, you're responsible for all of these things around you, et cetera, et cetera. And some of that is true and some of that is untrue. So today we're going to talk a little bit about that in the context of accountability, consistency, and all of that good jazz we have been yammering about all season long. And so one of the things that I know I've said before in different episodes, but I want to hammer home on today in this episode is about responsibility. And so I cannot make more clear that no one is responsible for you and your actions and the outcomes related to that, but you. That was one of the most powerful statements I heard dating back to 2013, 2014. I was listening to a podcast and the name of it escapes me. It doesn't even matter. Maybe it does at this point, but I was listening and I was thinking, you know, this person's going on and on about how they didn't feel like they had enough, they weren't making enough money, and they didn't feel like they had enough resources in their job, and they didn't feel like they had the things that they needed to be successful. And you know, at first they were talking about how they were blaming other people. They were blaming their boss or their job or their environment for not paying them more, even though they were working super hard and achieving all of their goals. And that was hitting, you know, kind of hard for me at that point. I think I'd been practicing maybe 6 or 7 years, and you get to this place, you're like, Mama got to make bank, or I got to do something else. And what the person said was so simple, but it's something that I think we often forget about. And they said very specifically, no one is responsible for taking care of you except for you. And so what does that mean in that context? If you are not making the money that you want to be making, if you're not in a career that makes you happy or brings you joy, if your business that you are responsible for or business line that you're responsible for isn't accomplishing the things that you want it to accomplish, that's your responsibility. And you can change all of those things. Now, with that comes some pain points sometimes. Let's not get that twisted. You know, when we go to change anything, change is hard. Change is hard for us because we're going through doing something different and it's unknown and it's uncommon and maybe it doesn't feel great right away. It's also kind of hard for the people that are around us because we teach people how to interact with us each and every day. And so when we've taught people that a certain type of behavior is okay, where they can push and push and push without increasing income, or they can add responsibilities to the plate without either removing something else off, adding team members, whatever, and we just keep taking it, we have taught them how to interact with us. And so when we start to take responsibility for those things and say enough is enough and draw some pretty firm boundaries for ourselves, that has a tendency to irk some people pretty significantly. So, but a lot of times taking that level of responsibility and walking through it, I call the fire. We always think the fire is really, really bad, right? We think it's going to hurt so much and it's going to be so painful, and man, maybe we don't want to go through it, and maybe we'll just sit where we are because heck, we know what that outcome is going to be, but nay, usually the flames aren't as bad as we think they are. There's maybe a little hiccup here or there that we have to deal with and that are a little bit painful. But overall, once we get through the flames, it's pretty nice on the other side. But it's our responsibility to take ourselves through that. It's not our boss's responsibility to push us through that. It's not our spouse's responsibility to push us through that or tell us what we need to do about something like that. We don't need permission from anyone to take responsibility for our lives. We need responsibility from ourselves, and we need accountability for ourselves, and we need permission from ourselves to take responsibility for the things that are before us. So if you're not happy with the things that are going on in your life, one, you should analyze, hey, how are these things going? You should run a checklist. You should be incredibly accountable to yourself more than anyone else about how things are going in your life. And you should be consistent about that. You should regularly check in to say, hey, how are these things going? And are they tracking to course? We have to be incredibly aware of whether or not we're taking responsibility for ourselves, because I will tell you, oftentimes, we go ahead and put responsibility for our lives in other people's hands without even realizing that we're doing it. And we lose track of that sometimes, and we need to check in and be incredibly focused on that. And lastly, we need to be incredibly dedicated to taking responsibility for ourselves, because like I said, with folks that we've taught how to interact with us in times past, they want us to continue to interact with them in a certain kind of way. And when we stop interacting with them in that way, some of them act out, some of them don't want to talk to you, some of them, run in another direction. But if they're not sticking around or they're not valuing your growth, are they really going to continue to be right for you anymore? I will let you contemplate that for yourself. Now, some of you are probably thinking, well, wait a minute, I have a boss or, a supervisor, and, they're responsible for giving me the tools that I need to be successful in my job, in my career. Yeah, that's their responsibility to do their job appropriately. And their job is to fight for the tools and things that they're going to need to make sure that you can and their teams can, in fact, be successful. But it's also your responsibility to vocalize to supervisor, boss, whomever, investor, whatever it's going to be, to say, look, I don't have the resources that I need to accomplish this thing before me. And so I either need to get different resources or I need to do something different. And so that, again, we're taking personal responsibility for the things over which we have control. What your boss is not responsible for, they are, but they aren't. What they're not responsible for is making sure that you're paid enough. Your responsibility is to make sure that you're paid enough for the things that you're doing each and every day. And if you're not, we've recently had the Great Recession. Go get a different job. And if you're saying to me, well, I don't know if I want to do that because X, Y, and Z, well, then fine, you're accepting where you are right now. And if you don't want to take responsibility for it and grab the bull by the horns and go and make some changes, that's okay too. That's a choice, but that's you, again, being responsible for you. Your boss is only responsible for the things over which they have control. And you have control over what you can do every single day in any environment that you're in to make decisions about what makes you happy. We ultimately need to be incredibly accountable to ourselves, first and foremost. And if we're not being accountable to ourselves and we're not being honest to ourselves about what's going on in our lives, that is where we need to check first. It is okay to be selfish in our every single day. And I'm not saying selfish in the term that we tend to think about it in Western culture, where self-absorbed, self-centered, not caring about what's happening for other people. I've said it before, and I will say it a dozen more times hereafter. But ultimately, we need to take responsibility for ourselves and be incredibly focused and selfish for the things that we need. Because if we aren't being selfish for the things that we need and taking care of ourselves physically, mentally, spiritually, whatever that means to you, and financially, what result? I will tell you the result is you can't produce the best outcomes for you, which means ultimately you can't produce the best outcomes for those around you. So if you're supervising a team, you're running a company, you're running your household, I don't care what it is, but if you're not taking care of you and you don't make that a priority, what are you teaching everyone around you? You're teaching them to do the same, which means not only are you not producing your best, but all of the rest of the people in your unit, your family unit, your team, your startup, whatever it's going to be, are also not producing their best. Let it sink in. Take responsibility for yourself. Be incredibly accountable and be selfish. And most importantly, don't forget, don't just be bold, be bolder. Thanks for listening this season and every season. We could not do this without you. And so we are truly appreciative here at Be Bolder. So one thing that I didn't chat too much about in the episode this week was this, our book club books. And so book club books this month were the women's right, the great fight for the women's right to vote, nonfiction, and the fiction of Under the Whispering Door. And so I want you to think about whichever one of these that you're reading, you know, how much accountability and responsibility did the parties that were involved here, the protagonist in either tale, how much responsibility did they take for their actions and ultimately the actions of those around them? You know, in the nonfiction tale, I would say, you know, how did those women who had to run entire organizations and make sure that they were funded and make sure that they were all pushing towards the mission, how did they take responsibility and give everyone the tools in that environment that they possibly could to make those things happen? And under the Whispering Door, how did the protagonist in that tale take responsibility for his questionable attitude in life and then own that in the intra-life period? And so I want you to think about those things, and then I want you to think about what kind of responsibility are you taking in your life day to day? You know, I know that for me personally, I probably take too much responsibility, and it's something that I actually have to work with and making sure that I'm holding other people accountable for the things that they can do differently or they can do better. But gosh knows I'm going to try to give people every single tool that I can to ensure that they can be the most successful that they can. But ultimately, I recognize I'm responsible for what I'm responsible for, and they're responsible for what they're responsible for. So as you peruse these two pieces, maybe you're doing both, maybe you're doing one, maybe you're doing the other, whatever it's going to be, I would challenge you to think about this and drop us a note and let us know what you thought. We will have a couple new books next week, although we won't have a podcast next week. We're taking a couple weeks off because we're focused on producing some content and material for next season and some interviews. So we're excited to have you back. And as always, if there's topics that you want us to be talking about, let us know that too. We are always open to constructive feedback. So as always, thank you for listening, and we will see you on the flip side.